now the source material. If you look at your chat box, you will see a link. If you would like to download the source material, you can click on that link and print it out at your home printers. But if you can't, that's okay, because through the magic of Zoom, I'm going to share these sources so that they're on your screen as we review them. So don't worry if you can't download or print. They'll be up on your screen to follow along. The other thing I'll say, just please make sure that you're subscribed to receive the daily emails from Beth Tikva. If you're not subscribed, whether you're a member or a non-member, that's because in case, like what happened last week, in case we have to cancel the class last minute, you'll be able to see through an email that's sent out to the congregation. If you're not subscribed, I'm going to put Ricky's email address right here in the comments section, ricky@bethtikvatoronto.org. Send him an email and just say, I would like to subscribe, please, to as a member or a non-member to the Beth Tikva email list. Not only will you get updates about this class, but all of the other fantastic programs that we have going on. You'll see that despite the pandemic, we're very, very busy around here with some excellent programs. So let me give a brief introduction to this topic. The topic is Pikuah Nefesh. Pikuah Nefesh means saving a life. It is a well-known principle of Jewish law. You might even call it, some people call it, a cardinal principle of Jewish law. The notion is Pikuach Nefesh, saving a life, trumps everything. And that in the case of a collision, that is two competing values, when one of those values is a life that needs to be saved, that life trumps the law. Now many people know this, but few people know where it comes from. If I was to ask you to find the verse in the Torah that says, and by the way, none of this applies when there's a life at stake, I think you'd have trouble finding it. And some of you who know a bit about Jewish history know that in pre-Talmudic times, the sources we're going to be looking at now are Talmudic for this class, right? Talmudic means the rabbinic period, the 2nd to 5th centuries CE. But in the pre-Talmudic period, when the Second Temple stood, this question of Pikuach Nefesh, it was a major source of contention between Jewish groups. You know that in Second Temple Judaisms, I say that very purposefully. You've heard of the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Essenes and the Dead Sea people and the Zealots. In the Second Temple, you had many Jewish groups with their own texts, their own values. This is spoken of in the New Testament, but also in Josephus. We know this. And one of the bones of contention between the different parties is how important saving a life is, and whether it does indeed trump other principles in Judaism. When the Romans were attacking in the Maccabean revolt, one of the issues that they were fighting, one of the issues between Jews that they were that was being discussed was this very claim. The Romans were choosing to attack the Jews on Shabbat, and there were some very fervent Jews in the Second Temple who said, we will not fight back on Shabbat. It's against the Torah. And so this led to a tremendous devastation in the early days of the Maccabean revolt. One of the principles of Judah Maccabee was that Jews need to defend themselves, have the right to pick up arms on Shabbat, and violate other laws in the Torah when a Jewish life is at stake. But we won't find that in the Talmud. The Talmud won't credit the Maccabean revolt for introducing, that is, warfare for introducing this concept into Jewish theology. It will come up with other examples and other stories. And indeed, one of the questions I think we're going to ask is why? Why is it that the rabbis insist on pretending that this concept exists in the Torah versus admitting that it actually is not clear in the Torah, and it's something that only was introduced into Jewish thought later through interpretation and actually through dispute, right? Through argumentation, and perhaps through the lessons of Jewish history. So we're familiar with the concept, but few of us are familiar with how this concept is actually articulated in rabbinic Judaism, qua Talmud, okay? This is a concept, Pikuah Nefesh, that liberal Jews, all the way from Reform Jews to modern Orthodox Jews, are very proud of. They love this idea because it shows that Jewish law is flexible, that it is a life-affirming system, that the halachic system itself can be thought of as competing norms, where doubts are part of the system and choices can be made depending on circumstance. And I think we've seen this concept being used during the pandemic all over the place by synagogues and Jewish schools who have said, we understand the value of Pikuach Nefesh in Judaism, and because of that, shul is closed. Or because of that, there's no school, because Pikuach Nefesh trumps everything. So we're going to look together at the texts that give Pikuach Nefesh its contexts and try to understand whether those synagogues and schools and other Jewish institutions who closed because of this value were making the right decision, in fact, making the right decision, or whether maybe, this is why this topic is interesting to me, maybe they were making the wrong decision. Or, I'll put it a different way, maybe Pikuach Nefesh was the wrong category to use when Jewish institutions decided, because of the pandemic, to close. But it's not just because of the pandemic, right? It could be any situation where we feel a life is at stake. There's a life meant to be saved. Some medical advice that claims such. And so that value takes priority over all the other mitzvot. Is it always true that that value takes priority over all other mitzvot? When is it perhaps not true? And is this concept actually more nuanced than perhaps we give it credit for? Because part of what I offer is criticism or potential criticism against synagogues and schools that decided to close. My question is also, what do we think about those Jewish institutions that decided not to close? The more observant ones, the more observant synagogues they tended to be, who said, no, we're not closing our synagogues and we're not closing our schools. There are values more important than Pikuach Nefesh in Judaism. Now, I know we have our own personal opinions about these questions, but I always find that the categories of Jewish law help contextualize our opinions, give us language and ideas for the values that we care about, and I think will really help us analyze these questions in a deeper way. And that's my hope through the next few weeks. So we're going to look first at the key text that is most often cited when someone wants to claim that nothing in Jewish law is more important than Pikuah Nefesh. Nothing stands before saving a life, except for a few things. Here is the base text. I'm going to share it with you on the screen. So can you all give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen, if you can see this text? Now, let me just make it a bit bigger. Be a bit bigger than that. There we go. Is that better? Okay. Shelley, can I ask you to read in the English this first paragraph from the Talmud, Tractate Yoma? Tractate Yoma is short for Yom Kippur. Almost all of the laws in this tractate deal with Yom Kippur. And you're going to see why this, a base question about this is, why are we talking about Pikuach Nefesh on Yom Kippur? What is the relationship of Pikuach Nefesh and Yom Kippur? So you're going to see in just a second. Okay, Shelley, can we go slowly? Okay. And I'll interrupt you. I apologize.
That's fine. Gemara. The sages taught in a Berita.
Okay, so let me stop you there. First of all, the translations that I'm using for this class are the translations offered by a fantastic website called Safaria. If you've never been to the Safaria website, it's a great resource, a treasure trove of translations of Jewish sources. You can find almost any of the classic Jewish books, all the way from the Torah to modern day responsa on the Safaria website, Sefaria, including a great translation of the Talmud, which is not a literal translation. It fills in the blanks and makes it much more prosaic in the way that it translates. So it's easier to read. So this portion begins with the sages taught in a Braita. That means there was an early teaching that goes way back. We don't know exactly when, but it's a teaching that goes way back that we are now going to repeat in this context. Somehow it relates to Yom Kippur. So let's see what the relationship is. Go ahead, Shelley.
With regard to a pregnant woman who smelled consecrated meat and or pig meat and craved those specific foods, one inserts a thin reed into the juice of that item and places it on her mouth.
Now, isn't this interesting? Okay.
Ew.
So now we know why this story is in the tractate of Yom Kippur, because it deals with cravings. And on Yom Kippur, everyone is hungry and thinking of the foods that they would like to eat. Now, if somebody tells me I'm craving food on Yom Kippur, the answer is, that's nice. Tough luck. You're not allowed to eat anything on Yom Kippur. It's a fast day. So this is really interesting, this story, because it's there. What it's offering is that there is an exception to that rule. And the exception here is actually not placed in the context of Yom Kippur at all. This story could occur any day of the year, because it's not that this woman wants to eat on Yom Kippur. It's that her craving is specifically for impermissible foods. There are two categories here of impermissible food. The first is consecrated meat. Consecrated meat means meat that was designated to be eaten only by the priests in the temple. Under punishment of death, it is forbidden for a regular Jew to eat that meat that's been consecrated only for the priests. So this woman, don't ask me why, but pregnant women, as we all know, get cravings for pickles and all kind of weird food. This woman has a craving specifically for consecrated meat. And I guess that's all that was around. Now, then her craving is even worse. Not, the first category is meat that she's not allowed to eat, that I guess is sitting in her house for some reason. But then it says pig meat. Whoa, she really wants a piece of ham or something. And it's that specific food. Now, note, this is not a woman who says, I'm going to die if you don't give me the pig meat. It's just a craving. And on Yom Kippur, everybody craves food. So what do we do for this woman? We take a reed into the juice of that item and we place it on her mouth. It does not say place it on under her. I would have thought it said place it under her nose. Let her smell it. But I guess maybe the rabbis are saying that would never be good enough, right? There's no way she'll be satisfied with that. She's going to want the taste of it. So the Talmud here, this is a crazy thing, gives permission for the juice of a ham sandwich to be placed on the mouth of a pregnant woman because she craved that food. Now, Shelley, why do you think this allowance is here? Are you as surprised as I am that the Talmud would say there's a way to deal with this and not just say, and tough luck to her?
I'm very shocked.
Okay.
I have no idea.
So where do you think this is coming from? That's the question. Why do you think the rabbis give this permission?
Unless they feel that the needs of a pregnant woman supersede any other restrictions.
So that's okay. So that could be a possible reason. Maybe it's because of the value of this woman who is pregnant. We bend the rules for her, either because we're compassionate for her situation, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more we're compassionate for the baby's situation. And we feel that her craving is upsetting her. And that might upset the pregnancy through stress or through anxiety, something like that. And then there's another question about, well, isn't this sort of allowed because she's not eating the food? She's just tasting the juice of that food. This is a tough one. Is that really a violation of kashrut or is it not? Now, there's no question that it's a violation of kashrut in terms of the rabbinic rules regarding kashrut. But it's not clear whether that would be a violation of the Torah's rule. The Torah says you can't eat these foods. Well, she's not eating the food. She's eating the juice of that food. Now, some of you will say, well, come on, that's the same thing. Well, you're seeing here a flexibility, bending the rules for this pregnant woman. Okay, Shelley, keep going.
Okay. If her mind becomes settled with that, it is well. Okay,
so now we have a little hint as to what is motivating the rabbis. In Hebrew, im nit yashva da'ata. We are worried about her mental stress. We're worried about her mental health. Her craving is so intense, we want to do everything possible to settle her mind. So if once she tastes the juice, she's happy, then we're okay. But what if she is still not happy? And it's funny because you think, come on, if you're going to give her, that's going to make in my opinion, right? That's going to make the craving a lot worse. I've never been pregnant before, but if somebody told me, I say to them, man, I would really, really love those ribs. They really smell good. And somebody said to me, well, because you have a craving and you're my friend, I'll let you taste the juice of the ribs. That would make me even more desiring than I was before. So part of this makes me, slap my forehead with my hand and say, what? This is just going to make the situation worse. There's no way that she will be settled with just a taste of the juice. So the rabbis are prepared for such a situation. What do they say, Shelley?
And if not, one feeds her the gravy itself of that forbidden food. If her mind becomes settled with that, it is well.
Whoa. Okay, so we're going a little bit farther now. She's still not happy, this woman. We're going to give her, folks, this is pig gravy. Okay, this is quite the forbidden food in Judaism. And we're pushing the limits here to even allow her to eat the gravy of the food, but not the food itself. Unless, keep going.
And if not, one feeds her the fat of the forbidden food itself.
Wow. We are allowed to feed her the fat of the forbidden food. Now, come on. This is the forbidden food. You could maybe convince me that the juice wasn't the pig itself or the gravy wasn't the pig itself. But now we're talking about the fat of that food. I'm allowed to give it to her. Why? Because I guess what their rabbis are saying is, the fat is not the essence of the animal. It's just a layer of fat. It's not the meat. The meat would be the worst thing that you could give her, but the fat around it is sort of not part of the animal. Don't ask how they come up with this, but I guess there's somewhat of a difference when you have a steak in front of you. When I was a kid, I always used to separate the fat from the other parts of the steak. I didn't want to eat the fat. So, in my mind, there was a distinction between the two pieces. And I guess the rabbis see it in the same way. And they permit just giving her the fat. But why? Why do they do it? And here's the key line. Go ahead, Shelley.
There is no halacha that stands in the way of saving a life, except for the prohibitions against idol worship and forbidden sexual relationships and bloodshed.
Okay, so that's the part you can underline. Ein lecha davar, there is no thing, she'omed bipnei pikuach nefesh. Nothing in the Torah stands in the way of saving a life. What bothers me about this source, what I hope bothers you too, is the question of, and this is what we have to think carefully about. Where is the life that is at stake in this story? Right? The rabbis were talking about a woman whose mind is not settled. And they jump from an unsettled mind to the question of a life being at risk. Now, one can think of this, I think, in two ways. First of all, the rabbis could really be concerned that a woman's unsatisfied cravings could lead to endangering her life, right? She might, maybe there were stories in their days of women who went insane and maybe took their own lives because of unsatisfied cravings. The other direction you could take this to is maybe they're concerned with the baby's life. Maybe they're thinking that if you don't give her what she wants, the stress that it will cause for the life of the baby will be so extreme that it will kill the baby's life. And these were the days before NICUs and other sorts of, when there's a woman who's pregnant, and there's so many cases in their day of babies that were being born stillbirth because of a lack of medical technology. Maybe the rabbis were just extremely careful with a pregnant woman, not because they were worried about her life, but because they were worried about the life of the baby. But this is the text we have. And if I was going to ask you to use this text to make decisions about Jewish law, right? What would you learn from this text? What if somebody said to me, Rabbi, I have a craving for pig, and it's driving me insane. I'm not pregnant or anything. Well, what would you do? What would you say to that person? What would you say to somebody who says, Rabbi, I have to work on Shabbat because I need the money for my family? Does this story help us answer that person? Is that a matter of life or death or not? Because this is not, in my mind, a very clear life and death situation, right? The conclusion that the Talmud makes at the end, which is nothing stands before saving a life, is not really self-evident from the story that's being told here. The story that's being told may or may not be a life that's at stake. It could just be somebody whose mental health is at stake or physical health is at stake, but not a life or death situation. So this source should rattle all of us. I think it did for you, Shelley, and that's good, right? And then there are these three exceptions to the rule. Pay attention to those exceptions. The Talmud does not say why they are exceptions. It doesn't give support. Why does the Talmud know that these prohibitions are more important than saving a life? What are the three? Idol worship, forbidden sexual relationships, and bloodshed. Now, folks, there are many, many mitzvot in the Torah. There are 613 mitzvot. The question that should be on your minds is, why these three? Why idol worship? What is so bad about idol worship that you should sacrifice your life? You're telling me that Judaism will allow a pregnant woman to eat a ham sandwich, but won't allow her to bow down to a statue? Forbidden sexual relationships and bloodshed. So, Shelley, just looking at these three prohibitions, what do you see that the three have in common? Do you see anything about them that's in common that might justify why these three are included as the exceptions to the rule? Idol worship, forbidden sexual relationships, and bloodshed. Well, remember, they're all three are sort of in the Ten Commandments.
Right.
idol worship, forbidden sexual relationships, at least part of the forbidden sexual relationships, right? Your neighbor's wife, and
Thou shalt not kill.
thou shalt not murder. So yes, one can say these are biggies. These are important rules. The other thing that these three have in common, and I want us to notice this, all three are negative prohibitions. Okay, what do I mean by that? The Torah has 613 mitzvot, but some of them are positive, thou shall, and some of them are negative, thou shalt not. All three of these prohibitions are negative. You shall not worship idols. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not murder. So I think that's important to notice that the three are negative prohibitions, that they are important, right? Very important. But still, I think we're left with the question of, but why these three? Why not stealing? Thou shalt not steal. Why eating kosher? Why aren't the forbidden foods included here?
Rabbi, what
Yep.
about the people that became conversos in order to save their life? So they, in essence, had to worship idol or another god, but they did it to save their lives.
So let's hold those questions, because that is a great question about how do you take these sources and make practical law out of them 1,000 years later, right, when the Spanish Inquisition comes along. But just based on this, Shelley, if this was the only text you had in front of you, what would you say to those conversos? You would say to them,
Not allowed.
you can't. You should have submitted to the Inquisition rather than what? Now, that's the question. Is the problem with these conversos idol worship? Well, then we get into, but is going to church idol worship? Right? What if you're going to church and you're saying the words, but you don't really mean the words that you're saying? So there's all these questions.
Yeah.
Also, what if you're doing it privately and not publicly? So again, all of these questions come into play, but with this source here, you would definitely have problems. But eat all the pork you want, right? Everything else is fair game, except for the big three. Now, I hope you found this source as interesting as I did, and very few people know that this is the original source that prohibits doing something which would endanger your life. Or excuse me, let me rephrase that. Prohibits not doing something that would endanger your life. I think that's correct, right? So if there's a ham sandwich standing in the way of your life for some reason, you eat the ham sandwich. That's the basic message here. Okay, that is Pikuah Nefesh. And of course, leading from your question, Shelley, is what does this teach us about whether synagogues should have closed during the pandemic or not? Shelley, what would you say based on this? Were synagogues right to close?
Well, when they said that people gathering indoors is a good way to spread COVID, I think that the synagogue was justified in doing that and closing to prevent people from dying.
So
and ultimately saving lives.
So think about this, Shelley and everyone. What was the mitzvah that we were canceling out because of Pikuach Nefesh when we shut the doors of the synagogue? Was it what was the mitzvah that was being trumped by Pikuach Nefesh? It wasn't pig fat. It wasn't idol worship. It wasn't sexual relations. It wasn't bloodshed. It was
saving a life.
no. What was the mitzvah that saving a life was trumping when we shut the doors of the synagogue? So the mitzvah was communal prayer, right? We were saying communal prayer is canceled in favor of Pikuach Nefesh. But everybody note this. Everybody note this. The three forbidden, here they are, the three forbidden categories, right? Which trump even Pikuach Nefesh, which are more important than saving a life, are all negative commandments. None of the three are positive commandments, like communal prayer is a positive commandment. So even though for you, Shelley, you say it's clear because it says there is no halakha that stands in the way of saving a life. So there's nothing that's more important. But the three examples that are given are specific negative halakhas. Thou shalt not. We have not encountered any positive thou shall mitzvah that is more important, or that would not be trumped by the mitzvah to place the sacredness of life first. Okay, just note that. Now, there's another category here that I want everybody to be familiar with called safek nefashot. Thank you for reading, Shelley. Safek nefashot means uncertainty about life. Okay. The next source we're going to look at, also from Tractate Yoma, uses that formula to arrive at a conclusion here. And the key phrase, and you can underline this, is Kol safek nefashot doche et hashabbat. Whenever there is uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation, it is more important than the laws of Shabbat. And we'll see here a couple of examples of how that actually applies. This formula is different than Pikuach Nefesh. Pikuach Nefesh, which is here in the Hebrew. Ein lecha davar she'omed bifnei Pikuach Nefesh means nothing is more important than saving a life. But I said to you earlier that the big problem with this is this pregnant woman, is her life really at stake or is it not? But safek nefashot, safek means uncertainty. So the very term that's being used allows us to deal with a situation where it's not clear that the person's life will be at risk if such and such happens. Because the other challenge I would offer to you, Shelley, is, well, if a person comes to synagogue during COVID, is it pikuach nefesh? Will they die? Well, first of all, that's a stretch, right, Shelley? First of all, very few cases of pikuach, depending on your age, very few cases of COVID succumb to death. And the chances that you contract it are, depending on the cases that are out there, right? It's a calculated risk. It's somewhere in, I don't know how to quantify it myself, but it's a risk. But certainly it's a stretch to say everyone who came to synagogue during COVID put their life at risk. That's a stretch. You wouldn't, I hope you all agree with that. It's much more, let's say, elegant, truthful to say, safek nefashot. If you came to synagogue during COVID, you may have been putting yourself in a situation where your life was at risk. It's a doubtful situation. There's no certainty, but the risk exists. So this term, safek nefashot, might be more helpful. Adele, could I ask for your help to read the first paragraph here, where we'll see the example of a case which falls into this category of safek nefashot.
Sure. Okay. The Mishnah states that one with pain in his throat should be given medicine on Shabbat.
Just stop there for a second. Everyone needs to know medicine is not, you are not allowed to give medicine on Shabbat. Very few people know this. But technically, giving medicine, taking medicine on Shabbat is not permitted. Okay. Now, I know some of you are going to say, what? How can you say that? First of all, there are different kinds of medicine. There's Tylenol and Advil, and then there's, pills that are that if you don't take them, they'll really put your life at risk. Let's say something for a heart condition that must be taken every day, or someone who has an autoimmune disorder. Those are different categories. But if someone was to say to me, Rabbi, can I take a Tylenol? I have a headache on Shabbat. Technically, the answer is no. So here's somebody who needs medicine on Shabbat. Why? He's got pain in his throat. Come on, everybody has pain in their throat. What's the big deal? But keep going, Adele.
Okay. Because it is a case of uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation.
So pain in his throat puts him in a life-threatening situation. So again, everybody note this, just like the pregnant woman. The example that's given seems to be an example that's very non-life-threatening. And yet, the Talmud insists that it is life-threatening. The pregnant woman who just has some craving, the Talmud says it's a life-threatening situation. Her life is literally at risk. Here, somebody with a pain in his throat should be given medicine because it's a life-threatening situation. Just note that. I don't have much to say other than it's shocking how non-serious these examples are. Go ahead, Adele.
Oh, okay. The Gemara asks, why do I need to say furthermore? And any case of uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation overrides Shabbat?
Now, we should know already that any case where there's a life-threatening situation overrides Shabbat. So why does the Mishnah need to teach specifically this case of the man with the pain in his throat? If I know already that life comes first, and where do I know that from? Well, I know that from right up here. There is no halakha that stands in the way of saving a life. And Shabbat is not listed among the three. So since Shabbat is not restricted, and remember everybody, Shabbat is framed in the Bible both in a positive and a negative way. A positive way, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, honor the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You shall sanctify the seventh day, but also you shall perform no labor on the seventh day. So it's both positive and negative, but it is not listed among the three. So the Talmud here is asking, what are you teaching me this specific example for? I already know that when somebody's life is at risk, their life comes first. I can give him the medicine. So what is the reason why we have to teach specifically about Shabbat? Go ahead, Adele.
Okay. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said they stated this not only in a case where there is uncertainty with regard to this Shabbat, but even if the uncertainty is with regard to a different future Shabbat.
Okay, so there's a specific issue with Shabbat where we have to teach something that needs to be mentioned separately from the general principle that saving a life comes first. Shabbat deserves special mention. Why? Because not only are we going to give permission for this person to break Shabbat today on this Shabbat, but also on a future Shabbat. Now, why would we do that? Remember, the rule is you have to keep Shabbat unless there's a life-threatening situation. So if there's no life-threatening situation next Shabbat, why are we giving this man permission here to violate the rules next Shabbat as well? So now the Talmud is going to explain what happened. Why is it that we're talking about a future Shabbat? Go ahead, Adele.
What are the circumstances in which uncertainty would arise as to whether or not his life will be in danger in the future?
It's another way of saying, what are you talking about this Shabbat and next Shabbat?
They are a case where doctors assess that an ill person needs a certain treatment for 8 days, and the first day of his illness is Shabbat.
So now we're understanding what's going on here. The man doesn't need one pill. He needs 8 days of treatment. Now, again, everybody, does it sound like his life is at stake here? Typically, if a life is at stake, 8 days of treatment, we're talking before, hospitals. 8 days of treatment means that it's not really a life or death situation. It's just somebody who's sick. And we think that these 8 days of treatments will make a difference. Now, the reason why 8 days is important is because that might include a second Shabbat where he will need treatment. And even if by that second Shabbat he's feeling a lot better, we still have permission to break that Shabbat as well. So go ahead, Adele. Here they lay it out.
Lest you say he should wait until evening and begin his treatment after Shabbat. So they will not need to desecrate 2 Shabbatot for his sake. Therefore, it teaches us that one must immediately desecrate Shabbat for his sake. This is the halacha, despite the fact that an additional Shabbat will be desecrated as a result, because there is uncertainty about whether his life is in danger.
So is everybody understanding here what we're talking about? This is a classic Talmudic example of deep Talmudic thinking. They're looking for small cases, exceptions to the rule, by which we derive important principles. I have somebody who's sick and he'll need 8 days of treatment. And I can say to this person, why don't we start your treatment tonight after Shabbat? Because then we'll minimize the number of Shabbatot that you'll break. You'll only need to break Shabbat next week. But you won't have broken Shabbat today. Instead of me giving you the medicine now, and then you'll have to break 2 Shabbatot. So what is the halacha, Adele?
Despite the fact that an additional Shabbat will be desecrated as well, there is uncertainty about whether his life is...
So therefore, do I tell him to wait until tonight to take the pill or no? That's right. You must break Shabbat immediately. So far, is everybody happy with this? It sounds very nice. This is a case of someone who's not even that sick. He's got his throat hurts. But I'm making some stretch from there that even if you have a throat that hurts, hey, maybe they had, the same coronavirus rules that we had now. If you you lose your sense of taste, smell, it could be nothing, but it could also be that you have to go get treatment right away, perhaps for a virus. So maybe the rabbis knew about something like that. And they said, you don't delay. You start your treatment, your medicine right away, even if it's on Shabbat. And we need to mention this example specifically, right? So that you know that it does not fall under the 3 exceptions to the rule. Not only does it not fall, Shabbat observance is not one of the 3 exceptions to the rule. You can break multiple Shabbatot if a person's treatment needs to go on longer and longer and longer. This reminds me of a question I got a lot in the past few months. My appointment to get my vaccine is on Shabbat. Am I allowed to go get my vaccine on Shabbat? Well, you're not sick, but is your life, do you fall within the category of safek nefashot? Uncertainty regarding a life-threatening situation. So I leave that to everybody to make up your own minds. Do you think that life in a pandemic falls in the category of uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation? And I remind you that pain in your throat does, which is a pretty weak barrier, if you ask me. Okay, there's example number 1. Let's see if we can do example number 2 of safek nefashot. Go ahead, Adele.
That was also taught in a Bereta.
Here's another story. Okay.
One heats water for an ill person on Shabbat.
Are you permitted to heat water on Shabbat?
No.
No, you're not allowed.
Whether to give him to drink or to wash him, since it might help him recover.
Okay, the barrier, folks, just keeps getting lower and lower. First, I had somebody who had a sore throat. Okay, now it's somebody who just needs a bath. You're allowed to heat up water for an ill person. If ill person, choleh in the Hebrew. At least in the previous example, it said something that there's uncertainty regarding a life-threatening situation. Right? Yeah, it's pain in his throat, but the pain in the throat might be connected to something more serious. It does not say that in this example. It just says he's sick. Whether his life or her life is threatened or not does not even factor into this story. But he needs something to drink or to wash. So I mean, that just goes to tell you right there, this isn't a very serious case. If a cup of tea is going to heal a person, but you are allowed to heat up water, folks. That is a prohibition in the Torah. The Torah forbids heating up water on Shabbat, but it's allowed if somebody needs it to help them recover. Keep going, Adele.
And they did not say it is permitted to desecrate only the current Shabbat for him, but even a different future Shabbat.
So just like the previous example, right? He'll need to be washed for every day for a week or for 8 days. You have permission to violate even the future Shabbatot and heat up the water for him. Go ahead, Adele. And one must not say,
let us wait and perform this labor for him after Shabbat. Perhaps he will get well in the meantime.
It's very interesting here. Don't wait and say, perhaps he will get well in the meantime.
Rather, one heats it for him immediately, because any case of uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation overrides
There we go.
Shabbat.
Safek nefashot. That word again. Safek nefashot. But this category looks like it's being stretched very broadly. You heat the water for him immediately. Miyad. Miyad. Wow. It takes a certain chutzpah to say, your throat sore? Quickly, I'll break every rule of Shabbat for you. It's a certain amount of chutzpah to act this way. Most people try and not break the laws of Shabbat if they don't have to. But this Braita says that is a sin. That is not the law. You're putting somebody's life in danger by acting like that. Even if there's a lot of doubt that this is a life or death situation. Like a lot of doubt. This does not sound like a life-threatening situation. But when it comes to somebody's well-being and health, Shabbat falls to the wayside. And just finish up here, Adele. And
Okay.
this is not only.
And this is so not only with regard to uncertainty, whether his life is in danger on the current Shabbat, but even in a case of uncertainty with regard to danger on a different Shabbat.
Right. So any Shabbat in the future as well, you're permitted to violate it because a person's health is not well. Right? Something is up with a person's well-being. All right. Thanks, Adele. We're going to see now even more crazy flexibility with regards to who's making the rules about whether a case really is serious and deserves the laws of Shabbat to be violated, or whether one should wait and see what happens until Shabbat is over. Go ahead, Morley. Can you read for us, Morley? I need you to unmute. There you go.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks, Morley.
And these acts should not be performed by Gentiles or Samaritans, but should be done by the greatest of the Jewish people. That is, their scholars. This is kind of self-promoting, isn't it? Who know how to act properly.
So what is that phrase there for, Morley?
Well, it's
what are these acts? These acts mean what?
Well, I don't want to use the pejorative word for Gentiles. We found a way to get around the Shabbat rules by finding people who are not subject to the rules.
Ah, very good. So what the Gemara is afraid of is that somebody in the community is sick. So I say, because I'm the rabbi of the shul, and I happen to have in my pocket the magic whatever pill that's going to help this person, but I don't want to break Shabbat for this person. I'm the rabbi. So I call over Danny. Danny is the head of our facility. I say, Danny, come here for a second. Here, can you take these pills and give it to him because I don't want to break Shabbat? What is this text saying? No, don't do that. Don't go to non-Jews. Don't go to Samaritans. Why Samaritans? That's like saying, don't go to Reform Jews. You go to somebody or a non-observant Jew. There's somebody there who drove to shul and doesn't care about the Shabbat laws. So you say, hi, can you do it because I'm the scholar, I'm the rabbi. I don't want to break Shabbat for this guy. Not only should you not do that, but it should be done by the greatest of the Jewish people who know how to act properly. Why do you think that's the case, Morley? Why is the Talmud saying the rabbi has to do it?
Well, first of all, I think it's an example.
Yes. Yes.
The second thing is there are probably boundaries, which the rabbis would probably understand.
Ah, that's interesting. There, you're reading the words act properly. They know how to act properly. So maybe me as a rabbi, I say, look, this guy just has a headache. This doesn't fall into the category of safek nefashot. So suddenly I'm a doctor, right? but I do like the first thing you said. That deserves to be highlighted. I hope everybody noticed that. The scholars set the example. And when you see a rabbi or a scholar violating important rules in order to save a life, it sets an example for the whole community that even the scholars set Jewish law aside when there is a life at stake.
A side comment.
Yep.
The greatest of the Jewish people aren't doctors.
Well, that i.e. their scholars, i.e.
That
their scholars, is not in the text.
Yeah, I understand.
That's not in the actual text of the Talmud. It just says Al Yedei Gedolei Yisrael.
Yes. So
we
could
think,
include doctors.
we think that means scholars, but it means the biggest people, the biggest Jews should do this to set an example, and also who perhaps know how to act properly. Now, I just want you to see these words, they're scholars and who know how to act properly, are not in the Hebrew. Okay.
So where are they from? This is
now here I'm going to introduce. Now this is why I preface this class by saying all the translations have been taken from that Safaria website. The danger of picking a translation, you've all encountered this before when you've read text in translation, is translation often changes the meaning of the original. So if I'm going to be a teacher that wants, that wants you all to have accuracy, I need to be honest and tell you when a translation is filling in some information that's not in the actual text, and perhaps doing so for ulterior motives. The Safaria translation often will use Rashi's commentary to help us understand what the words mean. It is Rashi who says, who know how to act properly. But in interpreting this rule, thus, Rashi, I believe, is not just translating, but is perhaps limiting the law here. Morley said, you could tell Morley knows how to study Talmud. He said two things, and both have to be judged separately. The first thing Morley said is, to me, the more obvious reason why the rabbi needs to do this. The more obvious reason why the rabbi should be the one giving the medicine to the sick person is because the rabbi sets the example, right? It's because the rabbi has to show everybody, look, you don't have to worry about Shabbat when a life is at stake. So much so that even though I could ask Danny or this Samaritan over there to do this for me, I'm going to give the medicine myself to this person in order to make the public statement that saving a life is more important. But Rashi did not choose that explanation or that interpretation to explain why the rabbi gives the medicine. Rashi instead chooses the second of Morley's explanations. What did Morley say as his second explanation? It's because the rabbi knows the limits, when to administer the medicine and when not to administer the medicine. Now, that, in my mind, is showing Rashi's discomfort. Okay, this is just my opinion, but it shows Rashi's discomfort with the great leniency that is being applied here to violating Shabbat. Why is it showing his discomfort? Because these words, who know how to act properly, introduce the idea that we have not seen yet, folks. The idea that there might be some cases where I say to the ill person, no, you don't get the hot water. No, you don't get the medicine. No, you don't get the pig juice. Remember, these words are not in the Talmud. And this is the text of the Talmud in the Hebrew right here. It just says, Ein osin advarim halalu lo al yedei nochrim velo al yedei kutim. Don't ask a non-Jew to do it. Don't ask a Samaritan to do it. Ella al yedei gedolei Yisrael. Have the Gedol Yisrael, the rabbis have to do it. That's all the Talmud says. But Rashi gives his rationale, and he chooses the second reason. Have the rabbi do it, because the rabbi knows when this applies and when it does not apply. Okay, keep going, Morley. Is everyone with me there? Everyone understands how Rashi is limiting this?
Got it.
Okay, go ahead. Everyone.
And one does not say these actions may be performed based on the advice of women or Samaritans, since they are not considered experts, able to declare a person ill enough to override Shabbat. However, the opinion of these peoples do combine with additional opinion, meaning that if there is a dispute, their opinions may be considered when coming to a decision.
Ah, very interesting.
We're going to have a Beit Din here.
Now, exactly. Look what, this is again Rashi's translation. Let me read for you all the exact Hebrew, and then we'll go to Rashi's translation, and then we'll end it for today. Okay? So just give me your attention for 5 minutes longer. Ein omrim. One does not say, Ya'asu dvarim halalu. Let us do these things. Lo alpi nashim velo alpi kutim. One does not say, let us not do it because it's the women and the non-Jews who told me that this man is sick. What is the issue, the circumstance that the rabbis are addressing here? Someone gets brought to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, are we allowed to break Shabbat? This man is sick. And the rabbi says, who says he's sick? Well, Mrs. Greenberg over here and Mr. Tiano. And the rabbi should not say, come on, she's a woman and he's a non-Jew, and we don't listen to them. Aval mitztarfin ledat acheret. I will only listen to them if one other person tells me that he's sick. In other words, a Jewish person, a Jewish male comes to me and says, he's actually sick, Rabbi. So the literal text of the Talmud, I want everyone to be clear, seems to be saying, and doesn't it fit everyone? It seems to be saying, you don't wait, you do it yourself, you don't give it to a non-Jew to do, you don't say it's a woman who says that he's sick, you don't say it's a Gentile who knows that he's sick. If somebody is sick, no matter who tells you he or she is sick, and no matter who you are and how important you think you are, you give the medicine on Shabbat. You heat the water on Shabbat. Doesn't that flow very nicely with the idea? But Rashi says something a little bit different. First, he says these actions may be performed based on the advice of women or Samaritans, since they are not considered experts, able to declare a person ill enough to override Shabbat. However, the opinions of these people do combine with an additional opinion, meaning that if there's a dispute, their opinions may be considered when coming to a decision. It seems that Rashi is saying here, well, there are circumstances when you should not listen to a woman and not listen to a non-Jew. You should only listen to them if a third person comes and tells you that the person is sick, and that third person has to be a Jew. So just to give this all to you in brief, where I think there's a dispute here about how to read this text, that shows you another example of how Rashi doesn't like this. If I was to read the Talmud, I would say to you, the Talmud says, do not ever say that because it's a woman or because it's a non-Jew who said Mr. So-and-so is sick, he is not to get medicine. That's what I think the Talmud says. Me, Rabbi Grover. I think it's actually pretty obvious that the Talmud says, do not ever say that a woman's opinion or a non-Jew's opinion is insufficient for determining whether a person is actually sick or not. But Rashi's view is a woman or a non-Jew should only be listened to when a third person comes and says, a third person who's a Jew comes and says, I agree with her and the non-Jew that this person is sick. Rashi is trying to put in some language here that limits our ability to break Shabbat in the case of a person who is sick. And I think he's introducing to us the first signs of hesitation that I think flow naturally, even for those of us who are reviewing these sources going, man, this is lenient. I mean, there are times when all of us feel a little bit ill. And you're telling me that for any sign of illness, I can break the laws of Shabbat, throw them out the window? That seems to be what's being suggested here. Illness, safek nefashot, does not mean life or death situation. It means illness. You're sick. If you're sick, none of the rules matter, unless it's idol worship or sexual immorality. But how often does that come into play? So this is quite the sick note that the Talmud grants a person. You're sick, you don't have to do anything. So that's where we're leaving this. With the Talmudic principle and both the interpretive discomfort. This seems a little bit too flexible. Now, I like that because at least where I'm coming from, it really does seem too flexible. So I think we have to live a little bit. I'm going to ask you to live for 1 week in this discomfort. And I want you to hold that thought as we get to class next week. Just if I was to ask you, thank you. If I was just to ask you your opinion, how sick do you think a person needs to be? How would you define the limits of illness?
Do I need a note from my doctor?
Well, and that's what I'm trying to ask, right? What if your doctor is a woman, right? I would say that's the language that's used in the Talmud. The Talmud uses a language, women or non-Jew, to say someone who's a non-expert. Right? But in our language, we would say, what if a person just doesn't feel well and they don't have a note from their doctor? They never saw a doctor, but they came to you and said, Rabbi, can I violate the laws of Shabbat? I just don't feel well. So where would you draw the line? Where do you think that flexibility is good, or do you think this is going too far? Because people don't feel well all the time.